All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this front porch conversation. It's been a while, but we are back sharing some great information with you and the community, and we are looking forward to this conversation today. And so if you are able to continue to share this information with your colleagues as we continue to build this coalition in our community. So today we want to focus on our front porch conversation on community violence. And so for those who are unfamiliar, the concept and the spirit of the front porch conversation is simply this. There was a time in our community where we looked at the model of a village. And in that village, you had the parents and the elders who would sit on their front porches, and they would know what was going on, who was in the community, who wasn't. If you got in trouble in one end of the neighborhood, by the time you got to the other end, your parents or those who knew you had already told it. So you got it twice, as they say. So that's the spirit of the front porch conversation. We want to bring back that community feel to what we're doing here in Winston-Salem and Forsyth County. And so to set the stage, we want to go ahead and discuss a little bit about what our Place Matters tenets are. So our Place Matters tenets is to, our entire community is better off when all of its neighborhoods are healthy and thriving. We also believe that complex challenges need comprehensive, integrated solutions. These solutions have to be resident-led. They can't be led from the top down. They are led from the bottom up. And so we want to focus on what we're doing with rather than for. Also, our approach is asset-based, which is building upon the gifts, skills, and talents of our residents. And last but not least, we convene community stakeholders, which this is part of that conversation today. So we convene residents, community-based organizations, the faith community, and business and education leaders. And so that's an overview of what the Place Matters initiative is all about. And now we will go next to the introduction of our panelists. For those who are just joining, feel free to drop your name and information in the chat. All right. So this morning we have with us Ms. Becky Ceartas, who is the Executive Director of North Carolinians Against Gun Violence and has been leading the organization since 2014. She has 22 years of experience organizing for policy changes at a local level, state and federal levels. She got involved in gun violence prevention work after Sandy Hook. As a new mom, the atrocity hit home for her, and she felt compelled to take action. She feels very fortunate to work with NCGV, volunteers and supporters to fulfill its mission, which is to make North Carolina safe from gun violence through educating the public about preventing gun violence, enforcing current laws, and enacting needed new laws. Also this morning, and welcome Ms. Ceartas, we have Mr. Effrainguan Muhammad, who is a native of Charlotte, but he has made Winston-Salem his home over the last 27 years. He is a proud graduate of Winston-Salem State University, where he received his undergraduate degree in sociology. Mr. Muhammad has worked in the behavioral field, and he has served diverse populations for over 23 years, particularly his work with 10K Fearless, which is a grassroots violence interruption intervention program. Over the years, Mr. Muhammad has received numerous awards, and one of the awards he received in 2019, he was recognized as the Chronicles Community Services Person of the Year. So we welcome you, Mr. Muhammad, to our panel discussion this morning. Also with us, we have Pastor and Elder Tembila Covington. She comes to us with a BA and background in religion and philosophy from Shaw University, and a master's in science and agricultural education from North Carolina A&T University. She is also the new pastor of Exodus United Baptist Church in Winston-Salem. And before this call, she was also assigned to crossing the Red Sea in Rockingham County, which is in Richmond County. She is also a certified Christian life coach and pastoral care. She is the proud mother of one daughter, Ms. Shanti Nicholson, and she's also a bivocational pastor and works with Neighbors for Better Neighborhoods. And Ms. Elder Tembila Covington also serves as the 2019 through 2022 president of the Ministers Conference. And so we welcome you this morning to our Front Porch Conversation, Elder Covington. All right, so we will get started on that note. So the first thing we want to do, we have 4 segments this morning. We want to discuss how did we get here in terms of community violence. We're going to discuss the past history of community violence from a state and local level. And so I pulled up an article today from the Winston-Salem Journal, which stated in 2021, Winston-Salem and Forsyth County experienced 50 homicides, which this was a historic high for the county. The previous record, I believe, was in 1994, and this served as a 52% increase from the year of 2020, which was a total of 29 homicides in Winston-Salem and Forsyth County. So let's start this conversation. How did we get here? We'll start with Officer Costner.
Hello, everyone. One thing I will start off to say that I am not the expert in this matter. We do have Dr. Pam Peoples-Joyner, who actually sits on the gang committee, and Sergeant Tyler Wiley is actually the gang sergeant. But I have been privileged to sit in front of both of them and just kind of discuss certain things, and just being an officer for 19 years and just kind of knowing trends that we have. These are things that we are talking about here at the Winston-Salem Police Department. So what we have noticed, especially during the pandemic, is just kind of an influx of people, and when we say people, just in general, of a lot of pent-up aggression. Sometimes people not having, they're not able to go places, they're not able to do things. Socially, you have more things going on with social media. That is a big one that we're having an issue with. People feeling disrespected on social media, and then that spills over when they go out in public. But anxiety, you'll hear people say all the time that, they just have anxiety, again, not being able to do things, where some people were able to go play sports, some people were able to go to gyms. Now you don't have that. So you just have a whole lot of underlying things that play a vital role in why people are more aggressive in their ways. We don't dismiss the fact that currently right now, the school system, we just had a discussion with Dr. Cato. I just sat in on a discussion with the school on how we move better with the school system and how we go forward with some of the items or articles that they're seeing. They're seeing, more younger people with drug use, vaping. So how do we combat that? So it is really a team effort. My job right now today as a community resource and officer is to just hear what your concerns are as a community and how we can get better. And when I say we here at the Winston-Salem Police Department, how can we get better to serve our community? How can we help you? What do you think And I say, what do you think on that? What do you think we can do a little bit better? Now, there are some things I'm going to be able to answer. And quite frankly, I'm going to be transparent, and there are going to be some things that I'm not going to have an answer for. Again, my name is not Katrina Thompson, who is our chief. She would answer a lot of those things. But again, I'm going to try my absolute best with any question or concern that you have today. But that's just some of the things as a regular officer on the street that we're seeing that's contributing to the problem.
Excellent. Elder Covington.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to come and to share. I'm going to take it from a faith-based lens, if you will. First, for me, it begins with a particular verse that we are very familiar with in the book of Matthew, chapter 22, which says that we should love our neighbor as we love ourselves. To some, they look at it from the golden rules perspective, which is to do unto others as you would want them to do to you. So what I believe is that we have lost as a community focus on the second part of the verse, love thy neighbor as yourself, which is to love yourself first in order to love your neighbor. We have failed to even consider ourselves as valued, much less being able to consider loving others. And so in order for us to love our neighbors, we have to begin with ourselves. In this day and age, if we were to be real with ourselves, if we were to be honest with ourselves, I think that most of us would struggle with approving ourselves, with loving ourselves. And so the application of love towards others is resulted in the fact that we have lack of love and self-approval for ourselves. And so it is difficult for us to know how to treat each other. And if this is what is taught even to our youth, then of course we can see that there is a lack of empathy, but more so apathy towards one another as humans that are becoming beings. And so we have to learn how to love ourselves first before we're able to love our neighbors. We need to know who we are, to know whose we are in order to be able to love others as well. There is an absence of love, and what is spreading is this new energy of helplessness, that we cannot serve ourselves, we cannot do anything for ourselves, much less for anyone else. We don't see people. And I think that is a part in what creates this environment that is self-destructive, but is also community destructive. The second part of that, I would say that because of social injustices, because of racism, because of trauma, even the pandemic, and now even the economic inflation, that doesn't help in living a successful or a comfortable life. Our ancestors, they were resilient, and we are too. However, their part of resilience was in investing in young people, investing in the youth, investing in communities, even investing in the faith communities, because that is where the community came together to reason together and to figure out how we can support one another. So in essence, there was this investment in self to love everyone around us. And then, of course, there is this aspect of they had hope. We have to find that space where we have hope. What is the hope? What does hope look like for our communities? What does it look for us? And I think all of that results in how we characterize and how we identify ourselves, how we come together, and how there is this distance between human beings altogether. And then the third part, what I believe, is that everything has become politicized. Everything in aspect of whether it's socioeconomic, whether it's in business, even faith entities, everything has become politicized to the point that we don't even know which side we need to be standing on, which side of the fence, which side of the line, the road, the tracks, because we're fearful, concerned that somebody's feelings will get hurt. And so those are some of the things that I believe contribute to this aspect of where we have gotten to in this violence. We have to first consider who we are, whose we are, love ourselves, and we will be able to conduct ourselves with that aspect of love that God gives us to love our neighbors.
Excellent. Thank you, Elder Covington. Mr. Muhammad, how did we get here?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Brother Cedric Parker, for giving us the invitation to be here today. And I want to take a little bit of a different approach to your question, because I believe the topic that we were given was to discuss community violence. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And, when we hear those two words, community violence, there's a certain image that comes up in our minds. And I dare say 95% of the time, when we use the phrase community violence, the images of low-income Black and brown people pop into our minds, right? Mm-hmm. But that is one level of community violence. And that violence is born out of hopelessness and despair that's caused by another structural form of violence. When we hear community violence, William Scott, who shot a police precinct, killing his mother and grandmother, and then getting into a shootout with law enforcement, that is community violence. When you have Anthony Granato to shoot Julius Sampson in front of Haynes Mall in broad daylight, that's community violence. When we talk about children going to bed at night without any food and struggling with hunger pains, that's community violence, right? When we talk about families living in substandard housing, that's community violence. When we talk about families living in food deserts in Winston-Salem and Forsyth County so they don't get nutrients needed for the body that put them at risk of disease and sickness, that's community violence. So it is that structural violence at the top that produces the despair and the hopelessness that leads to the street level violence that we often is conjured up in our mind. And the pandemic has only exposed those pre-existing conditions, if you will, that were already there that exacerbates the current situation. And to take one from Elder Tembila Covington, I'm honored to be on this Zoom meeting with, from the scripture. Hosea 4:6 says, "My people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge." So there is a prerequisite knowledge that we have to have, and that is a knowledge of self, because when an individual knows themselves, then they can love themselves, they can respect themselves, because charity starts at home. I can't get to loving my neighbor if I don't love myself first. And we have to reestablish a culture of love in our community, and take that culture of love back into those communities who are struggling the most. So we also have to deal with the structural violence that leads to the street level violence. So it's a twofold war. And so that is the challenge, and that's the struggle that we must overcome. And we have to be real. America has fostered a culture of violence. We just recently saw that on full display between, unfortunately, Will Smith and Chris Rock. But the same institutions that condemn that violence, every day they promote reality TV shows that get their highest ratings as a result of what? Violence, right? Mm-hmm. So we have to change the culture, and I agree that has to be a culture of love and re-establishing family values as well.
Absolutely. Excellent points. And we'll go to you, Ms. Ceartas, from a different perspective from the state level. Also, one of the mentions that Elder Covington she drawed upon the political aspect. And so I know that's a lot of your work. Can you speak to how do we get here from a state level, and also kind of a little bit from the political side as well?
Sure. Well, first, I'd just like to thank you again for having me here. I'm honored to be on this panel. And I'd like to continue off of what Mr. Muhammad was talking about in terms of root causes of gun violence. Many times we're just looking at the guns and how people are getting access to the guns, which is definitely part of the problem. But we always must first look at root causes of gun violence, things like concentrated poverty, income inequality, and all the other things that Mr. Muhammad were talking about, we need to take those things seriously and address those when we're addressing gun violence. Now, when we look at root causes and then couple that with easy access to guns, that I believe is when we're seeing the most community violence. And many times people are getting easy access to guns because of our lax gun laws. We have a couple of strong gun laws in North Carolina, which those at the General Assembly are continually trying to dismantle. We look at in 2020, we saw a 65% rise in gun sales nationally. And when we look at here in North Carolina, we have a big problem with gun theft. Between 2012 and 2017, we saw nearly 97,500 guns stolen in North Carolina. Many of them are from unlocked vehicles. And that number is probably much worse. In the first 9 months of 2021 in Charlotte and Mecklenburg County, they saw their gun thefts go up by 36%. And many times those guns that are stolen are ending up on our streets. So we really need to look at those root causes of gun violence and looking at how people are getting access to weapons. You know, many times in stories about gun violence, nobody's asking, where did these guns come from? Many times they're bought legally somewhere and then are ending up either through being stolen or straw purchases, ending up in the wrong hands. So we have to look at a comprehensive approach.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Did not make that connection that there's so many complexities to this issue. And so knowing that that is also a real thing, that these guns aren't just, popping up in gun shows and things of that nature, but they're also being stolen and used as well. So thank you for that perspective.
Mr. Muhammad, may I wanted to add on what Ms. Ceartas is, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Please, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it. But Becky, what Becky shared about getting to the root causes of it, as I mentioned, the structural violence that's at the top that has to be addressed because it fosters the violence at the bottom. And specifically in terms of what impacts those who are trapped in despair and hopelessness in the community that we generally think of when we think of community violence, the proliferation of guns. We have a gun culture in America. On a national level, our government is the biggest arms dealer of weapons around the world. And those weapons are often used to fuel conflicts in countries around the world. Well, unfortunately, we're seeing the same thing here domestically, to where we have guns in our community. And I'm not against anyone's Second Amendment rights. However, when you see 13, 14, 15-year-olds with weaponry that you've never witnessed before on the streets, that is problematic. And while, of course, we are informed by law enforcement that many of the guns that are getting into the hands of our young people particularly are coming from cars being broken into or homes being broken into, that may be true. And we are also told that it is coming from their big homies who may put guns into the hands of young people. That may be true. But it is also true that, and this is where, as Becky stated, there has to be policy changes. The mayor of Chicago and the city of Chicago recently sued a rural gun shop in Indiana that was responsible for guns from one rural gun shop being responsible for 800 shooting incidents in the city of Chicago alone. So that highlights what I call the rural gun shop to inner city pipeline. When we talk about guns, Becky talked about the straw man purchases. All over the country, there are instances where some of our military personnel are heavily involved in making those purchases and bringing them across states, and they end up in the hands of the inner city. Once again, there was an investigation from the Justice Department that exposed 3 military servicemen using their credentials to buy weapons to sell them to gang members to fuel it. So we have to look at this from the root of it and be honest as we address these issues in our community. So I just wanted to highlight that so that we have a comprehensive understanding of where the guns are coming from that come into our community, so we can address that as well. And if you just do, lastly, if you just do a small Google search of rural gun shops that have been broken into, you'll see a pattern. You'll see a pattern where the same gun shop has been broken into multiple times within a month. What's that about? And then these weapons are reported stolen, then they're showing up on our streets and in homicides. So I just wanted to add that we have to highlight the rural gun shop, the prison pipeline, because a lot of the weapons, whether they're getting into the hand, coming to the big homies who are distributing them to the youth, these individuals don't manufacture weapons. They don't manufacture the ammunition. So we have to even begin to look at those who are manufacturing the weapons. In what manner can we hold them accountable? I think there has been some lawsuits brought against some of the large gun manufacturers, even in the Sandy Hook case, as well as an incident that happened in California, tragically, with members of a synagogue bringing lawsuits against the manufacturers of their weapons being used in violence and bloodshed.
Excellent point, Mr. Muhammad, and thank you for that context and kind of broadening that scope of how did we get here. And so as we transition now to our next question in this segment, we're going to talk about how are we currently doing? How are we doing? So what are the present and current efforts to prevent community violence from a state and local level? So again, stating the question, how are we doing? What are the present and current efforts that we are right now doing to prevent community violence? We'll start with Elder Covington.
Again, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. How are we doing? Allow me to start with the positive because there's so much still at stake. I would say that we are doing well in identifying the effects of what violence has brought into our community. But what we are still in desperation of is to evaluate those root causes, as has already been elaborated. And so what we're doing, we're doing best at certainly identifying and enumerating what those effects are in trying to put some type of resource in place. And again, it all aligns to what Mr. Muhammad mentioned about the systemic components. We are seeing the effects and we're trying to align it within a system that really needs to be dissolved and that needs to be restructured in a way that is more equitable, that is more fair, that is in a way that can certainly serve to heal a community. And so we've done well to see what the effects of this violence has brought to our community, but the root causes still need to be evaluated and assess exactly where this is stemming from when we're talking about access to guns and artillery and that sort of thing, or even to drugs. Anything that is trying to contradict any growth development, anything that is trying to destroy the community. So we still have a long ways to go in identifying what the root causes are before we can even begin to heal and to bring some type of resource and solutions. I believe here, particularly in Forsyth County, we have a world here that is saturated with nonprofit organizations that have essential and great programs that serve a group of their respective communities. I believe in collaboration. I believe we need to do a lot better job in coming together and in supporting each other. Where I work at Neighbors for Better Neighborhoods, I would suggest that every neighborhood, every community is different from the very next to us. And so it's important that everyone that is working in a nonprofit not be ignored or actually be defunded, but rather should be supported so that they can build capacity and collectively coming together with other nonprofit organizations to support the needs of a community and to bring that connectivity, to build relationships in order that we can certainly serve where it needs to be done in identifying those root root causes. And so it's important, in my perspective, that where we are, there's still a lot of work to be done. There's policies that need to be put in place at a state level, even at a national level. As Mr. Muhammad mentioned, there is, of course, the Second Amendment is the right of everyone. I am certainly in agreement with that, but there needs to be some policies of moderation in place where there is not a saturation or underground market of these guns getting into the communities that we call poor, we call under-resourced, that sadly resemble the Black and Brown community. And so I think at this point where we are, though we are doing good to identify the effects of what violence is bringing to the community, we have a lot more to identify those root causes so that we can certainly bring not just a Band-Aid, but an opportunity to take care of what is reasoning to bring this violence, and to certainly diminish it within our respective communities, particularly in the under-resourced Black and Brown communities, marginalized, in those who are systemically oppressed.
Excellent. We'll go over to you, Officer Costner. How are we doing currently from a Winston-Salem law enforcement perspective? What are your thoughts?
Okay. Well, we have a lot of different things that we're doing here in the community. Many times, what we don't do a good job of, in my personal opinion, is being transparent with letting the public know what we're doing. So right now we have Shot Spotter in our city, to where once a shot is actually fired, we can tell you exactly where that comes from. That's going to be in the area. I know they spent a lot of money on that program. We also have the Real-Time Crime Center. The Real-Time Crime Center, a lot of people, because again, being the neighborhood watch coordinator, the one thing that I heard when we rolled that out is, well, I don't want to connect my camera to a system and then Big Brother's watching me. That's not what that is. The Real-Time Crime Center, what that is if you have a Ring system, if you have any of these systems at your home, you could actually register your camera with the city of Winston-Salem. What it does is the only time that we can utilize that information is when you give us access to it. So let's say that you have a shooting in your area. Let's say that you have a car breaking in your area. What happens is now that we know where the cameras are, what we do is we send out information to you. We send out an email or we send out a text saying, hey, this crime happened in your area from this point in time to this point in time. Do we have access to your cameras, or can we have access to your cameras from that time frame? And that's what we yank. It's a lot of times what most people say, well, why is that important? Well, you may not know what you're looking for, but an officer would definitely know what time frame the call came out at, who responded, where they responded. Those are going to be things that we may know that the average public may not know. So the Real-Time Crime Center is something that we have. We also right now are in the making of having tag readers. That's going to be another project that we're getting ready to take on, to where with stolen cars, as they're driving through neighborhoods, what happens is that tag reader captures that. We have it in real time. Again, that's connected to the Real-Time Crime Center. What happens then is if an officer's in the area, because we have what we call AVLs on our cars, more or less we can tell where every car is here in Winston. If we see that an officer's in that area and we now have a tag that went through that is stolen, we now deploy an officer in that area real time. So there are a lot of different things that police around the world are working on right now. There are so many different projects that we have that we're trying to get ahead of the game to be proactive instead of being reactive. But those are just some of the things that I know of that we have here in the city that is trying to combat the violence that we have as far as with guns. I'm going to go back to one thing that I did hear earlier with Becky when she was saying about lock up your guns. That is the one thing as a patrol officer that I've seen a lot of. And it's not just your guns. What we seen was, and I'm just going to be very honest, we seen unlocked doors, and we also seen cars that had keys to the car that was right beside it. So what does that do? That now has not only your gun stolen, but your car stolen. You have garage door openers in your car where they can come right back and access your garage. There are a lot of different things. I know recently we did the public safety announcement. That was myself. I was talking about how we lock up doors. So there are a lot of different things and projects that the Winston-Salem Police Department is working on. Again, if you have a question or concern, I'd be more than happy to answer. There are so many different things that there are some things that I'm going to forget. We also talked about military. So I'm going to touch on that. When I do have a best friend that is in the military, and the one thing he is suffering from, he just got diagnosed with chronic PTSD. Chronic PTSD, more or less because he's been in a war environment to where there were shots fired constantly. There were bombs that were blowing up convoys. He told me, he said this, and I'm just going to give y'all something to think about. He said, my name is Verl. He said, Verl, he said, the one thing about, he said, what do police say all the time? And I was like, depends. He was like, when you're in a car. I was like, oh, speed kills. He was like, exactly. He said, but do you realize that when I was deployed, speed is what saved your life? He was like, he has a fear of animals, dead animals on the side of the road, because he said when he was over there in the war area, they would actually put the bombs inside of a dead animal so that as you went past it, they would detonate the bomb and kill the convoy. So those are just some of the things. I always tell everybody, I love discussions like this, because what this does is it now starts a conversation that we need to have, so that it takes that village, so that the next time you see someone, you'll have an understanding of what they're going through. So again, those are just some of the things that I wrote down. The last one, we're getting ready to come up on a voting season. Here's something I will say. Listen to everybody's position on what they have. And when I say their position, how are they going to combat that? Be in those forums to where you could ask those questions or get it in front of those politicians or those people and listen for the answer. You know the difference when you hear an answer that is just an answer that somebody had scripted, and you know the difference between someone that's heartfelt, because they're going to consistently say the same thing and not just the flavor of the month. So those are just some of the things that I have. I'm sorry, I had one more thing. Defunding. Again, there's nothing wrong with defunding, but I would say instead of defunding, I asked the chief of police, I asked our chief, Katrina Thompson, this when they talked about defunding the police. I said, Chief, did anyone ask you where you felt the money would best go to with the city to help people that are coming out of jail? We have a lot of different things for people that are trying to get acclimated back into the world. We have trades out here. You have plumbing, you have brick mason, you have all kinds of things that people can still do. So I said, did anybody ever ask us what we thought would be best, since we are the police and we may see some areas that other people don't? And she said, no one asked her a question about that at all. But with training, when you start defunding police agencies, a lot of things that started happening is their training, and that's their education. And what I would say, being here for 19 years, we are one of the best trained agencies. I can go anywhere in the state of North Carolina and some other places because of what I have. I have well over 500 training hours that I have. So there's not a training that I haven't attended, and I'm getting ready to go to some more. So always, again, when you start having new chiefs come in or you start having new people, how are they going to incorporate that so that they make this agency or any other agency that where you live in better? Just my thoughts.
Absolutely. And just before I go to you, Mr. Muhammad, we will have hopefully some time at the end for Q&A. So if you have a question, please put that in the chat so I don't miss it. I do see a hand up. So so going right to you, Mr. Muhammad, how are we currently doing? So basically the context, you've heard the comments, your perspective, 10K Fearless, how are we doing?
Well, I can't speak in terms of on necessarily so much a state level, but I know specifically with the 10,000 Fearless, as I stated, is a community initiative. that we've based out of our mosque that was based off a call on the 20th anniversary of the historic Million Man March in 2015 to come back into our community in an attempt to make our community a safe and decent place, to organize, to train, to go back into the community, to stand between the guns, the gangs, and the violence. So since then, what we've attempted to do is provide conflict resolution training, mediation services, a squash the beef hotline, so that when we actually go out on the ground, when we actually go out into communities on the ground, our initiative is a street by street, block by block, door by door initiative to where we're engaging community, finding out what the needs are. And, it has a psychological effect because when community sees community, then community feels comfortable. They feel comfortable with talking. And while we've been out in real time, we've gotten individuals who were brandishing weapons on each other to say, hey, brother, it's children around. Let's not do that. To get them to holster their weapons or to break up domestic disputes. And as well as once we're out in the community going door to door, once again, ours is very unique and specific. We're asking the community, what are the needs? And the hope is if there are needs that local elected officials can address, bringing those to their needs. It could be something as simple as a street sign down, which presents safety issues. It could be an area that's not well lit for whatever reason. It could be an abandoned house that no one has condemned that attracts a lot of things that need to be addressed. That is a safety issue. Also, while we're out, we know that a lot of young people have witnessed many of the homicides in our community, and they've been traumatized, and no one has addressed that. So we've sought to work with culturally competent clinicians specializing in trauma-focused therapy to actually come into the community to see what the needs are and offer those services, as well as partnering with other individuals to address, the fact that in many areas in Winston-Salem and Forsyth County, we're in food deserts. So once you address the basic needs of an individual, that gives them hope, that lifts them out of the despair, and it gives them an alternative. So once we knock on the door, behind that door may be an individual who's at risk of being the next perpetrator or a victim. And so having that conversation puts a seed in their head. And I can share with you, Brother Parker, that when we're out there, and we've had a few elected officials to actually go out on what we call peace walks, where we specifically identify certain neighborhoods. And we brought elected officials out who've been with us and other individuals from other organizations, and they literally see the temperature of the community change just by having community present. So that's what we're doing. But our hopes is that we can sustain that and be consistency, because that's the most thing. We may have a good initiative, but for whatever reason, it's not sustained, it's not continuous, because sometimes for a lack of funding and resources. But this has been our effort in the 10,000 Fearless. And we look at, we've always looked at the Winston-Salem Police Department's crime data, which based off what's going on in a particular area, that kind of drives our needs. So if we're in, District 2, Section 222 in a particular area, and there are a lot of car thefts, that drives our conversation. So our conversation, when we see there's a lot of thefts and burglaries, is what? Thou shalt not steal. That's the conversation that we're having with community. If there is an area in the statistics that says sexual assault is a problem in that community, our conversation becomes about valuing our women and our young girls, that they should not be accosted, that they should not be catcalled, that they should not be disrespected, right? And so that's been our initiative. And the 10,000 Fearless, we are not just here in Winston, we're all over the country, very active in Atlanta, very active in Baltimore. Many of the brothers have partnered, not just with individuals from the mosque, but churches those that are really active within the church coming into the community. And so our hope is to offer this training and experience to those institutions within our community. You can't have a police precinct, as Officer Costner can testify, on every corner in the community. And we don't want that, because that would be a police state. But we do have houses of worship and other organizations in the communities that are impacted. So what we hope is that these houses of worship and other organizations and mosques will identify the communities that some of the violence and the crime is happening in, and with the right type of training, begin to set up conflict resolution, mediation, and actually going out on a consistent basis, street by street, block by block, door to door.
Excellent. Ms. Ceartas, how are we currently doing from a state level?
Sure. Well, I'll start like Elder Covington did with the positive, because there's unfortunately a lot of negative going on at the state level. But on the positive side, we've been working with our allied organizations, both state, local, and national organizations, to get more funding for community violence intervention programs, both street programs like the one Mr. Muhammad was talking about, or hospital-based programs, really looking at some of those root causes, doing direct mediation, making sure these programs are adequately funded. So the good news is that the Governor's Crime Commission prioritized these types of programs in their funding proposals. And that happened at the end of the year, and the awards will be announced in June. So we hope that there'll be both community and hospital-based programs that have been awarded these dollars. And then also we saw in the North Carolina state budget, there was funding for Winston-Salem hospital-based violence intervention program and one at Duke University. And these hospital-based violence intervention programs have culturally competent case managers that are from the communities that they serve, that work with people and use this being in the hospital as a teachable moment for looking at what people need to choose a different path to prevent retaliation. And they work with them, not just giving them a phone number or something like that, but working with them hand in hand to get those community services that they need to choose to walk on a different path. So that's incredibly exciting to see how effective those programs are. And then the street programs, like what Mr. Muhammad was talking about, really using that public health approach to addressing this public health epidemic. Just the positive that we're getting money for these programs at the state level, which is very exciting. But then the North Carolina General Assembly has also been passing very dangerous legislation that's going to make our communities a lot less safe. For example, there's a bill, House Bill 398, which would repeal our pistol purchase permitting system, which this system requires that you get a background check no matter where you're buying your handgun, even if it's at a gun show or online. And this is incredibly important because our federal background check system only applies if you're buying a gun from a federally licensed dealer. That means if you're a domestic violence abuser, a minor, somebody experiencing a mental health crisis, somebody convicted of a felony, you can go to a gun show or online and buy a gun, no questions asked. But here in North Carolina, we've closed this dangerous loophole on handguns with our pistol purchase permitting system. And it's incredibly effective. We know that things would be a lot worse without this system. Because we saw in Missouri, when they repealed a similar law, they saw their gun homicide rate spike by 47% and their suicide rate spiked by 24%. Whereas in Connecticut, after they passed one of these laws, they saw their gun homicide rate go down by 28% and their suicides go down by 33%. So thankfully, Governor Cooper vetoed this bill. We're calling on all lawmakers to sustain his veto. So there's definitely promising things that are happening at the state level and ways that we can all get involved to hold our elected officials accountable to preventing community violence.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ms. Ceartas. So as we move into our last segment, we have just a few minutes left. I want to save some time for Q&A. So if you do have a question, please feel free to drop that in the chat. And so this last segment, we're going to go kind of rapid fire. If you can have your comments to about 1 minute. And so we can save a little bit of time for Q&A. So the last question is, where do we go from here? Right? So what future changes need to be made? But I'm also going to add to this, if you can add a little bit of hope. What's the vision, right? What do we see in our communities in the next, 3 years, 5 years, that we want to see from a perspective of bringing wholeness. I'm going to use the word shalom, peace to our communities. What are we going to see in the future with these efforts? So I'll start with you, Mr. Muhammad. Again, really quickly, what are we going to see in the future? Where do we go from here?
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. In terms of it, when we're in the community, we see the resilience of community and the fact that in spite of the darkness, there's light there, even among the young men and women who are sometimes caught up in some of the violence, that they want to change. And when people are desirous of change, then change will happen. It's just as Elder Covington mentioned, love. And we've seen examples of that throughout Winston-Salem and Forsyth County. And so I'm optimistic because of that light and that love that's here, that if we stay together, those who are sincere, we can change the trajectory of what's happening in Winston-Salem, in Forsyth County. And I've stated before, this city and county can serve as a model because we have all of the talented people, we have the funding. It's just a matter of coming together so that we make that change that is so desperately needed. But I'm optimistic about that with the right people being in place.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Elder Covington.
Thank you again, Elder Cedric Parker, for this opportunity. I'm going to try to put it in 1 minute, but I have to place this here first for Officer Costner. I want to clarify, unless my comments were misunderstood, when I use the word defunding, that was in relations to nonprofits being defunded. Because there are so many great programs in the community. And as I stated before, every community is different. And I think that there's great impact when we see the greater work of activism, of community building and development that is taking place within its own respective communities in the organizations that are built out of those communities. So I think it's important that foundations as well as government agencies see it in relations to taking account for even the smaller nonprofits to be funded and not defunded. I think it's important that when we look at a community and see that even though it may be a small group that is receiving or reaping the resources from a small network, that in itself is impactful and can create change in a broader perspective if we allow it to take time, maintain it, and give it an opportunity for sustainability. And so in my way, what do we do now? I think it is important that respectively, that we take advantage of some of the programs, perhaps even from the Winston-Salem Police Department. I really thought in the beginning, although I had the grand tour at the police department about this camera surveillance, I promise you, I thought in prior that it was intrusive until the shooting that took place at the Kermit Hot Dog House. My church is right around the corner. I just happened to be there for a counseling session. And it just so happened that one of the gentlemen who actually did the shooting happened to have taken a phone from one of the officers there and threw it behind the bushes that is on the property of the church. The police officers came to the church and was able to request for any surveillance that we had. Thankfully, we do have that at the church. So now after that, I believe that it's important that we consider even that from a broader perspective throughout our communities to make sure that until we get the time to be able to connect and build these relationships of where we need to get back to, we need to be able we need to have that security, that surveillance that will support the security and safety of every community member that is in that respective community. And in closing, I say to that, we need to continue to strive to build those stronger relationships. And how do we do it? I'm going to end with the same concept that I mentioned before. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. We have to do that with God love, because that is the only way we're going to get back to understanding what the root causes are of this violence and to bring medium for healing to our communities respectively, individually and collectively.
Wonderful. Officer Costner.
Elder Covington, that you did not hurt my feelings at all on that one. My basic thing was with defunding. Anytime you talk about funds, make sure that you know where they're going. That was the only thing I was trying to reiterate on that one. The biggest one for myself, I know I heard on the state level, training. And I'm real big on that, training or education. I think our alma mater at Winston-Salem State was enter to learn, depart to serve. Okay, so let's train the trainer. How, they talked about grants and different funds. How do we obtain those and teach people? You need to teach them how to do themselves. It's popular saying in the Bible, if you teach a man, you go out and catch a fish, they can eat for a day, but if you teach them to fish, they'll eat for a lifetime. So I think that's the biggest one that we can start doing now, is take back this conversation that we're having here. I hear a lot of churches. I hear a lot of people that are big in the community and doing things in the community. Make sure that you give them, don't spoon feed, because anytime you enable someone, they're not going to be able to do it themselves. But give them the tools they need and say, hey, I've given you this. What are you going to do with it to better yourself? So that's what I see. But thank y'all so much for the opportunity. And like I said, I love this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you as well. Mrs. Ceartas.
Yes, so thank you again for this opportunity. And real briefly, we just feel that I'm hopeful because of organizations like Mr. Muhammad's, people out there in the community doing this very difficult work and working with others to get funding for these programs at the local, state, or national levels. We need to strengthen and keep our pistol purchase permitting system. We need to advocate for more safe storage.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and end our meeting, but we will stay on if you can, just for 5 minutes to answer any questions that the audience may have. So I want to thank our panelists again for taking the time for this wonderful conversation. This will not be the end. I can assure you that we will have a follow-up conversation with more community leaders on this particular topic. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. And so we look forward to having you on our front porch again really soon. So be on the lookout for information regarding our next conversation. And thank you.